Not enough people hate the Muslims. There's gotta be something we can do about it. What if we got a bunch of Egyptian Jews and we told them to plant bombs inside of American and other embassies? We could blame it on the Muslims. Then they would hate them. That's literal terrorism. That's definitionally terrorism. Do you understand that? I don't give a shit.
Lavon Affair, part of history you were never taught. The Lavon Affair was a false flag operation carried out by Israel and Egypt in 1954. Israel was concerned about the rise of Egyptian nationalism under President Gamal Abdel Nasser and feared the strengthening ties between Egypt and Western powers, especially the US. So Israel came up with a plan. The operation was codenamed Operation Susannah, or as it is commonly referred to now, Lavon Affair. Israeli military intelligence recruited Egyptian Jews and undercover Israeli agents to orchestrate a series of bombings targeting American and British-owned institutions in Egypt. The goal was to blame the attacks on the Muslim Brotherhood, Egyptian communists or local nationalists, and damage relations between Egypt and the Western powers, particularly the US and the UK. During the month of July in 1954, the operatives carried out a series of bombings targeting American and British-owned civilian facilities in Cairo and Alexandria. The targets included cinemas, libraries, American educational centers, post offices. On July 2nd, the agents detonated bombs at a post office in Alexandria. On July 14th, they bombed the libraries of the US Information Agency in Alexandria and Cairo, and a British-owned theater. The homemade bombs, consisting of bags containing acid placed over nitroglycerin, were inserted into books and placed on the shelves of the libraries just before closing time. Several hours later, as the acid ate through the bags, the bombs exploded. On July 23rd, an incendiary bomb went off in the pocket of one of the agents outside the British-owned theater in Alexandria. On October 5th, 1954, Egypt announced the arrest of a 13-man spy ring. Egypt concluded that the operation was ordered by the Israeli Secretary of Defense, Pinhas Lavon, hence the name Lavon Affair. The 13 agents consisted of Egyptian Jews and undercover Israelis. 2 were acquitted. One of the Israeli agents, Max Bennett, lived himself on arrest. 1 unalived himself in prison. 2 more were unalived, and the rest were sentenced to lengthy prison terms. The Lavon Affair meant that Israel lost significant standing and credibility in its relations with the US and the UK, which took years to repair. In 2005, Israel publicly honored the surviving spies by presenting them each with a certificate of appreciation for their efforts on behalf of the state, ending decades of official denial by Israel that the operation ever took place. The Lavon Affair serves as proof that false flag operations are not off the table when it comes to Israel.
Incredible.
It is.
They have a remarkable ability to be on the ground when big events take place. Like, it was confirmed that the Mossad was on the ground the day that JFK got shot. It has been confirmed that they were on the ground recording, at least according to ABC News, who investigated this, the day that 9/11 took place, which you could say was obviously the beginning of us being involved in these never-ending wars in the Middle East. And obviously the USS Liberty, they got caught executing another false flag at the exact same time, the Lavon Affair, which they were going to murder Americans in order to drag us into war with Egypt. So I don't know if that was before or after the US Liberty, but there's a lot of, I mean, you can't say that Israel is not involved in false flags, because the Lavon Affair proves that they are.
King David Hotel.
King David Hotel means exactly proves that they are. You survived what?
Now, something happened in 1954 that I think we should be aware of. We should not forget these moments in history. This is something that's thrown down the rabbit hole of history. It's called the Lavon Affair, named after the former Israeli Defense Minister Pinhas Lavon. So this was an attempted false flag operation, codenamed Operation Susannah, carried out by Israeli spies in Egypt in 1954. So these Zionist Israeli agents in Egypt planted bombs in busy civilian areas in Cairo and Alexandria, where Americans and the British would often visit, like movie theaters and libraries. The plan was to commit terrorism by killing civilians, especially Americans, and then blame Egyptian Muslims in order to cause tensions between Egypt and the West. The plan fell apart, and the Zionist spies were caught and then confessed the Lavon Affair.
However, on the 23rd of July, a bomber approached the British-owned Rio Cinema in Alexandria. His device went off prematurely. Not long after, 13 men and women were in Egyptian custody, and much to the surprise of the authorities, they were not communists or Muslim Brotherhood, but Egyptian Jews and Israelis. They belonged to Unit 131 under the control of Israel's military intelligence, or Amman, who were seeking to weaken the credibility of the Egyptian government and keep Britain in Egypt.
Welcome to Tell Me More Stories Told Us podcast. We've got a really intriguing story for you today, pulled from some fascinating sources you sent over. We're looking at a secret operation back in 1954 Egypt.
That's right. It's a complex one, full of international intrigue, secrets, and some pretty unexpected consequences.
Exactly. We're going to peel back the layers, forget the headlines from the time, and really get into what your sources say happened and, frankly, why it still matters. Get ready to be surprised.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Your documents paint a picture of the early 1950s.
Yeah.
Egypt's in flux. There's this major tension point, the Suez Canal.
Right. Always the Suez Canal back then. And the U.S. was involved.
Yeah, the U.S. was pushing for Britain to pull its troops out of the canal zone. But this made Israel very nervous.
Nervous why? Because of Nasser.
Pretty much. They were worried about Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian president, and his growing power and, well, his ambitions. They feared a British withdrawal would just embolden him.
And Israel tried diplomatic routes first, didn't they? According to these documents.
They did. Your sources show they tried to lobby the U.S., influence policy, but it just wasn't working. They felt their concerns weren't being heard.
So that feeling of anxiety of being ignored led them down a different path, a more covert one.
Exactly. That's where Operation Susannah comes in. Your sources pinpoint the summer of 1954. The head of Israeli military intelligence, Colonel Benjamin Ghibli, initiates this top-secret mission.
Operation Susannah sounds almost gentle. What was the actual objective?
Well, the objective was anything but gentle. It was audacious, really, to carry out bombings and acts of sabotage inside Egypt.
Okay, hold on. Bombings. Sabotage. That's a huge step. But the most fascinating part, reading through this, is who they wanted to blame. It wasn't themselves, right?
Not at all. That's the core of it.
Yeah.
Your documents clearly label this a false flag operation.
Yeah.
The plan was to make these attacks look like the work of Egyptians.
Which Egyptians?
Various groups, maybe the Muslim Brotherhood, maybe Egyptian communists, or even just, unspecified malcontents or local nationalists, anyone but Israel.
And the goal of that deception, what were they hoping to achieve by framing these groups?
The aim, as your research points out, was to create this atmosphere of violence, of instability, make it seem like Egypt was falling apart.
Ah, so if Egypt looked unstable, the British might think twice about leaving. They'd feel they needed to stay to maintain order.
Precisely. Create enough chaos, enough perceived danger, especially to Western interests, that Britain would pause its withdrawal plans. It was a pretty intricate high-stakes gamble.
High stakes is right. So what kind of places did they target to sell this narrative? Military installations?
No. Interestingly, they went for civilian spots, but ones with clear Western connections. Things like cinemas, the U.S. Information Agency libraries in Alexandria and Cairo, also a British-owned theater.
Okay, so hitting places that would definitely get the attention of the U.S. and Britain. What about the bombs themselves? The sophisticated stuff?
Surprisingly, no. Your notes are spot on. They were homemade devices. Basically, bags of acid placed over nitroglycerin.
How does that work?
Well, the idea was the acid would slowly eat through the bag, and then boom, it hits the nitroglycerin. They apparently hid these contraptions inside books.
Inside books? That's clever in a chilling way. Were they trying to hurt people?
The sources suggest the timing was key. They were set to detonate several hours after closing time. So the aim seems to have been destruction and panic, perhaps, rather than casualties, but still incredibly risky.
It really does sound like a spy novel plot. Who were the people actually planting these bombs? Who did they trust with this?
The operation was handed to a very secret Israeli intelligence cell, Unit 131. Your documents mention it had been around since 1948, involved in clandestine work.
Okay, an established secret unit. And who were the agents on the ground in Egypt?
Leading up to it, an Israeli agent, Abraham Dar, went undercover. He posed as a British citizen, John Darling apparently, and he recruited Egyptian Jews.
Egyptian Jews, wow, okay. That adds another layer entirely. Why them?
These recruits, referred to as Sionim in some of your sources, they weren't new to risky business. They'd previously helped other Jews illegally flee Egypt for Israel.
So they already had experience operating under the radar, against Egyptian law.
Exactly. They had existing networks, perhaps, and a proven willingness to take risks for Israel. Now they were being trained for sabotage.
So, secret unit, undercover recruiters, local agents with a history, homemade bombs. When did they actually put this plan into action?
Your timeline shows things kicked off in the spring of '54 when the network was activated. The first actual bombing was July 2nd at a post office in Alexandria.
And then the libraries and the theater.
Yep, those followed on July 14th. Initially, the damage was minimal, according to your sources, and importantly, no injuries reported at first. It might have seemed like it was working, initially.
But it didn't stay that way, did it? The sources point to things going wrong quite quickly after that. There's mention of another key figure arriving.
Yes, this is where the story takes a really dramatic turn. Another Israeli agent, Avri Elad, was sent in to oversee the operation. He had his own complex cover story, Paul Frank, supposedly a former SS officer.
A former SS officer. That's quite a cover identity to choose. What was his role and how did things go wrong?
His role was oversight. But here's the really explosive part, and your sources present it as an allegation, but a persistent one. It's alleged that Elad himself tipped off the Egyptian authorities.
What? He betrayed the operation. Why would he do that?
The motives are debated in your materials. Was it money? Was he a double agent all along? Was it something else? The sources don't give a definitive answer, but the allegation is central to the failure.
If the Egyptians were tipped off, then they knew what was coming.
That's the assertion, that Egyptian intelligence was watching. They apparently followed one of the operatives, Philip Knightenson, as he went to plant a bomb at the Rio Theater.
Did they arrest him there?
Before they could, disaster struck for Knightenson. The bomb he was carrying accidentally ignited in his pocket. Just went off prematurely.
Oh my God. So he's caught literally red-handed, or rather burnt-pocketed.
Pretty much. He was arrested immediately. And of course, a search of his place turned up incriminating evidence, including the names of his accomplices.
And just like that, the whole network collapses.
Essentially, yes. 11 people were arrested in total, the Egyptian Jewish recruits and some undercover Israelis.
What about Elad, the alleged informant, and Dar, the recruiter?
They both managed to get away. They escaped Egypt.
But the others arrested, what happened to them? Any mention of casualties among the captured?
Tragically, yes. Your research details that 2 of the captured operatives, Yosef Karman and Mir Max Beneath, died by suicide while in Egyptian prison. A truly grim outcome.
That's awful. A complete disaster.
Yeah.
So arrests, suicides. What about the legal process for the others?
There was a trial in Egypt running from December '54 into January '55. The verdicts were harsh.
How harsh?
2 were sentenced to death by hanging. 2 others were actually acquitted, surprisingly, and the rest got long prison sentences, anywhere from 7 years to life.
Death sentences. Were there attempts to intervene from outside Egypt?
Yes, your sources mention international efforts. Figures like Maurice Orbach, apparently acting on behalf of Winston Churchill and the World Jewish Congress, pleaded for clemency for those condemned to death.
Did it work?
There were hopes, maybe some initial indications of a reprieve, but ultimately, no. The 2 men were executed.
This whole thing is just devastating. Meanwhile, back in Israel, what was the public being told? Did they know their government was behind this botched, deadly operation?
Not really. Not at first. Your sources emphasize the strict military censorship at the time. The Israeli public was largely kept in the dark.
So what did they call it? They couldn't just ignore it entirely.
It was given a very bland, euphemistic name, the Unfortunate Affair. In Hebrew, Haisek Habish. The official line pushed to the public was basically that these were innocent Jews falsely accused by Egypt.
Wow. The Unfortunate Affair. That's quite the understatement. So the public believed one thing while behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes, he was causing a political earthquake. The failure of Operation Susannah blew up into a massive crisis in Israel. It became known as the Lavon Affair.
Named after Pinhas Lavon. He was the defense minister then, wasn't he?
That's right. And as your documents clearly state, Lavon absolutely denied knowing anything about the operation. He claimed he never authorized it.
But someone must have authorized it. Kibble, the head of intelligence, wouldn't just go rogue on something this big, would he?
Well, that was the heart of the crisis. Who knew what? Who gave the order? Lavon's denial contradicted findings from inquiries. It led to investigations, counterclaims, a huge political mess.
Did Lavon survive it politically?
No. He was eventually forced to resign in 1955. And it didn't stop there. The prime minister at the time, Moshe Sharett, who also seems to have been kept in the dark about the operation, initially he resigned later too.
So 2 top figures gone. This affair really rocked the Israeli government to its core.
Absolutely. It had deep, long-lasting repercussions for Israeli politics,
Right.
for trust between the military and civilian leadership. It was a major, major scandal.
And all this time, the details of Operation Susannah itself, the false flag aspect, the specific targets that remain secret from the Israeli public.
For a very long time, yes. Censorship was tight. Your sources mentioned that even when the affair was discussed later, people often used code words for the operation and the key players involved. It took years for the full picture to emerge publicly.
It's fascinating, isn't it? This story has so many layers: espionage, betrayal, political fallout. If you're finding this deep dive into Operation Susannah as compelling as we do, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss our future explorations on Tell Me More Stories Told as podcast.
Definitely subscribe. Now, thinking about the wider impact, did this unfortunate affair damage Israel's relationships with other countries? You mentioned the U.S. and U.K. earlier.
Oh, significantly. Your sources highlight that the Lavon Affair really hurt Israel's international standing. Trust was broken, especially with Britain and the United States. They were implicated, in a way, by the targeting of their interests, even if indirectly.
And rebuilding that trust probably took years.
It did. It was a serious diplomatic setback, adding to the internal political damage. It really shows how covert actions, especially when they fail so spectacularly, can have massive ripple effects way beyond the initial intent.
It's a stark reminder of the risks involved. But the story didn't quite end in the 1950s, did it? There was a later development regarding the agents themselves.
That's right. Decades later, in 2005, there was finally some official acknowledgement. Your research notes that the Israeli president at the time, Moshe Katsav, awarded certificates of appreciation to the surviving operatives from Operation Susannah.
So after almost half a century of official denial or silence, some form of recognition.
Exactly. It was a symbolic gesture, perhaps, but it marked an end to the years of Israel officially pretending this operation and these agents' roles in it never happened. It acknowledges the human element, the people caught up in these grand secret plans.
And when you step back and look at the whole thing, based on your sources, it's quite a unique situation, isn't it? A country's public being told one story, believing their people were victims, while the reality was this complex, state-sponsored covert operation that went disastrously wrong.
It really is. The level of secrecy, the political infighting it caused, the tragic outcomes for some involved. It just highlights the immense pressures and the sometimes unbelievable lengths nations went to during that Cold War period.
So wrapping up this deep dive, what's the big picture takeaway from these sources? What does the Lavon Affair ultimately tell us?
Well, I think looking at all this material, it's a powerful, maybe even sobering reminder of just how complex and perilous covert operations can be. It screams caution, doesn't it?
It certainly highlights the potential for things to go dramatically wrong.
Right. And the consequences aren't just geopolitical. They're deeply political domestically and deeply human. It shows how secrecy can spiral, how blame gets shifted, and how the truth can be buried for decades. It really makes you think about accountability.
And the long shadow these kinds of events can cast. The sources definitely provide a vivid snapshot of a moment where intelligence operations, political ambition, and perhaps miscalculation collided with devastating effect.
Absolutely. We hope this exploration of the documents you provided on Operation Susannah and the Lavon Affair has given you, our listener, a richer understanding of this really complex piece of history.
It certainly raises questions, doesn't it, about the nature of intelligence work, about international relations, the cost of secrecy.
It does. And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with. Considering the initial goal was to prevent British withdrawal by faking instability, how might history have unfolded differently if Operation Susannah had actually succeeded in its deception? Something to ponder. We encourage you to keep exploring.